By now you're already familiar with flex direction, justify content, and align items. Now in this lecture I wanted to quickly show you one of the problems you may run into and then how to solve that with flexbox. So let's say we have more items than this in our container. So let's say we have 6 divs in there, and each of them also has a bit more content than just a number. Then we can see they take up a lot more space. And now let's also say we have a container that isn't quite as large. So let's say, for example, 500 pixels here. And then you can see that our items overflow the container. And flexbox is not gonna do much about that at first, but there's a thing we can do about it. Let's first now use row maybe, so that it becomes even clearer how the items run out of the container here. Now I'm gonna also get rid of the item 2 with the larger font size. That was only to demonstrate the align items baseline property. Alright, so still our container is not large enough to encompass all the flex items, but you can make flexbox wrap those items that are too large into a new row in this case, because our flex direction here is still set to row. And what we can use for that is a property called flex wrap. Now flex wrap by default uses the value no wrap, which is exactly what you can see there in the browser. And what we can do instead, of course, is use wrap. Now with wrap, flexbox is going to make our items float into the next line instead of making the flex container overflow. And right now item 5 and 6 are aligned a bit weirdly maybe in the second line. So what you can do is you can do justify content flex start if you prefer to have them just stack onto each other from top to bottom and from left to right. And this really depends on what your layout is supposed to look like, of course. Now there's one more value you can use for flex wrap, which is called wrap reverse. Now you might not be sure what that's gonna do, but let's take a look at that. So as you can see, it's just gonna wrap the item still, but now the second row, so to say, is on top and the first row is on the bottom. So wrap reverse, you have your first row here and your second row up here. This might be useful in some cases, but I would assume that you will normally use either wrap or keep it at the default with no wrap. Okay, so flex wrap is a rather simple property. There are those 3 values you can use: no wrap, wrap, and wrap reverse. And now I want to quickly show you that the flex direction and flex wrap properties here are actually so closely related to each other that there's a property that kind of acts as a shorthand for those 2 properties, because those 2 together basically define the basic behavior of your flex container, and therefore the flexbox specification made it easier to define both of them in one step. So in order to define flex direction and flex wrap with only one property and only one line of code, you can use the so-called flex flow property. And then you first have to specify the flow direction, in this case row, and then your flex wrap property, in this case, let's say wrap. So flex flow row wrap is nearly the default. The default would be row no wrap. And you can play around with this, maybe try wrap reverse, row reverse, and wrap reverse. And then you can see that it changes accordingly in the browser. So after a while, you're probably gonna get used to using flex flow instead of using flex direction and flex wrap separately. But you can also use them as you like to get started and just to remember all the different properties you have. Now, as a little challenge, what you might do is you can take a look at the showcase here and then go into flex wrap and try to rebuild all these different grids here without looking at the actual code in the showcase, of course, and just try to create the HTML for this and create the appropriate flexbox CSS code. Alright, so now that we can have flex containers with multiple rows by using flex wrap, we now can look at another property which will allow us to define how the different rows then behave inside their container, very similar to justify content, and you're going to see that in the next lecture.